We turn now to a nationwide tragedy, suicide. A new report from the Centers for Disease Control says it is growing rapidly among teenagers. Since the year 2000, the suicide rate for teens is up 28%.
We've seen an increase in not only the suicide hotline numbers, but the attempts have been more serious.
Experts say suicide is a growing concern during the pandemic. Data showing the volume of calls on the rise and the types of calls even more alarming.
The study is warning that the next health crisis triggered by COVID-19 may actually be a wave of suicides.
But it seems like this happens over and over again, Dr. Drew. We miss the warning signs. The warning signs are missed. How do we fix that?
Welcome to another episode of Shut Up and Listen. Today I am joined with a good friend as well as mentor, Adam Wilde.
And former coworker.
Former coworker. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
All right, so tell a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I like coffee. I like to roast coffee. But I didn't find that out until a lot of doors closed for me as far as what I was doing for work. So I've done ministry. I've been involved with community volunteering and things like that. But certain things that I had planned on didn't end up working. And things I even went to school for that I couldn't really find a job in. And so eventually enough doors closed where now I'm roasting coffee as a job. And my wife is a nurse and does that for work. And then we both just are raising our kids out here on the little homestead we're trying to build. So, yeah.
So today's going to be a little bit different of an episode. Adam and I had a mutual friend that few months ago took his own life, which is terrible news. And a couple days ago, I received word that one of my friends, also a coworker, took his life as well. And I felt like I was being pushed in a direction to put out a video about mental health because it's an uncomfortable topic, but it's one that needs to be talked about more, I believe. And so that's what today's episode is going to be about: is suicide awareness as well as mental health and the outcomes and what it does to people. Living in this day and age, it can be very discouraging, right? Everyone's going through a lot of hard times now. What advice would you give to people trying to keep a positive mindset through these hard times?
So there's a few things that I would recommend, and one of them is to not be afraid to talk about it. I mean, just this conversation could be, that question you asked me might be what you ask any friend of yours, especially if you haven't heard from them in a while. And during the times we're in, it's really important to stay connected as much as you can. Obviously, there's limitations, but by opening up the conversation, we allow people to see where we're at, and they can come alongside us in a way and help us out. And also, we can't be afraid to ask for help and ask for that next step that we need from somebody who can help us get there. And that could look like getting professional help, and it could look like taking a medication that is appropriate for what you're going through. In my own story, I went through depression as a young man, and it was a severe depression that the doctors called it, and it took counseling. I went on an antidepressant. I had friends who held space for me, which holding space is just a matter of listening to somebody, letting them explain what they're going through, and that can be so healing and helpful during a time where you're really struggling. And also, people came alongside me to encourage me in just the basics of what I could do each day. When I was depressed specifically, I didn't want to do anything, and you lose motivation. Depression is one of those insidious diseases that messes with your brain chemistry and takes away a lot of your drive and your desire to do anything to help yourself. So you're down a hole and you don't want to really get out of your own power. So having people just remind me to do basic things like go to sleep on the right time or work out. These little things that can help you. It doesn't make it go away, but it gets you a little bit farther along in your journey of recovery. So yeah, staying connected and staying willing to hear other people's perspectives on what you're going through. Somebody who's depressed or going through a mental struggle can feel really isolated. And it's important to not assume that everything you feel and think is 100% true. As crazy as it seems, that sometimes we can trick ourselves with our own perceptions and our own feelings into believing that's the only way that life is. But it can help to take a step back and say, what other things are true other than this thing I'm feeling and struggling with. So those are some of the things you might walk through as you go through counseling or just talking to a friend. Yeah.
And yeah, you touched on this, but a lot of times, you said, what you think isn't always true,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it just takes an outsider's perspective or opinion to kind of help push you through, that the struggle that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
How did people's influence on you help push you in the right direction?
Yes. Well, specifically, I would say that there was a struggle. So at the beginning of realizing that something was wrong, which is sometimes hard to even notice that you're no longer enjoying life and you're actually suffering a lot, but there's nothing physically, maybe you're fine, but it's just mentally, it's almost like you're being attacked. And I remember at first nobody understood me. They were like, well, what do you mean? Your life is just fine. And it's hard to see somebody who's depressed and not be like, you don't have a problem. I'm looking at you and you have both arms and both legs and you seem to be like standing. So how could there be a problem? And the reality is that their brain chemistry is going through all these changes and telling them that there's a lot of pain or sadness and your neurotransmitter levels are off and your synapses are recycling the same feeling of sadness with depression at least and other mental illnesses. These things are all sending signals to that person. And so at first people didn't understand and I felt really alone. But my dad, he stuck with it. He was somebody I would call like a champion for me because he said, I don't get what you're going through, but I'm going to be here with you. And sometimes that's the most important thing is having somebody who's with you. Maybe they don't feel it themselves, or maybe they can't understand, but that they're willing to walk with you and hear you out and see what they can do to help you. My dad helped me get connected with a therapist. He helped me get connected with my doctor to prescribe a medication. So I wouldn't have sought those things. And sometimes all we need to do is come alongside someone who's feeling alone and lost and feeling like the world is caving in on them.
Just being there for someone in a time of need. You may not even do anything, but just the fact that you're there is what can help a lot of people.
Absolutely. I remember with depression, it's like you can get so overwhelmed by things that aren't even really there or aren't even really a physical problem for you, but you can get so just flooded with fears, anxiety, things you don't even know are actually not a problem. Our minds are full of this capacity to imagine, but with depression, I was only using that capacity to meditate on the worst outcomes or the most painful parts of my feelings, and I needed help to get out of that place. And so, again, just when you notice somebody and they're saying, I hate my life, or I just want to end all of this, it's really important to, as soon as you hear something like that, just really reach out and encourage them and really encourage them to go get help that they need. We're not always equipped, but we can't be afraid just because you're not an expert. I'm not an expert, maybe, in mental health. But just that presence to say, okay, I sense that you're maybe going down this path. It's a dark path, but there is an alternative. And just being there to just encourage them, like, look, we can do this together. I'm with you. I can't make it go away, but are you willing to come with me? I want to be there with you through this. So yeah.
I know from my perspective, you know, when I heard about the death of our friend and my other friend, I was like, man, I wish they, you know, reached out to me.
Right.
And then with that, it's like, well, man, I wish I would have reached out to them. You know, it's
Exactly.
you can't always, you know, when someone that's hurting, they're not always going to be asking for help. You know, they might feel like they're strong enough, or they just don't want to. I don't know what it is, but they just might not always reach out to you. So it's important to always be reaching out to your friends. You know, if you hadn't heard from them in a while, give them a text, give them a call. You know, just check up on them, and especially in today's age, you know, you can never be too sure.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, is that you will not always notice. And we who survive and remain, we can't necessarily say, oh, if only I had done this, I could have saved that person. It's such a natural thing to feel, though, is like feel shame, feel guilt because somebody took their life. But I think approaching it with a lot of compassion is important. That person was enduring a lot, and we don't know what was exactly going through their minds. But like you said, if possible, really, especially in this season of our lives and in history, if we can be connecting as much as possible and reaching out as much as possible. And I'm sad that our friend passed, and I'm sorry to hear about the news about your other friend. So I'm really glad you've opened this conversation up, and we can't be afraid to just talk about that there are real challenges with our minds sometimes, and we at the same time need to make sure people hear there is a way out of those dark places too. As difficult as it is to believe when you're depressed or going through one of these things, there is an alternative path, and it's toward the light and not toward the darkness.
So life without purpose, right, is pretty much meaningless. I think we can agree on that. And I feel like a lot of people struggle on finding a purpose in life.
Yes.
And I think that can lead to a lot of mental health issues because, you know, if they don't find a reason for them to be alive, you know, why be alive? And that's a horrible mindset to have.
Right.
But how would you pursue or give advice to someone that is struggling to find their purpose in life?
Yeah. I totally agree. You have to have hope, and if you lose your hope, you can't endure another moment, really. So I would say this conversation, what I hope somebody takes away if they're going through a difficult time, whether it's a situational depression or like a long-term, their body chemistry is out of control and just it's a long-term battle that they might endure through their whole life, I would just make sure they heard that there is hope and there is an alternative and there is a possible way where they don't have to feel always the way that they feel. Hopelessness can end us. When you're looking deep within, you can get lost in your own feelings, and I'd encourage everyone to find something outside themselves that they care about a lot and that they want to live for. For me, that was my faith in God that brought me through a dark time. I didn't only, just pray. I walked through certain steps that I didn't feel like taking, like going to my therapist. I argued with my dad. I was like, I'm not going to the therapist. It's not going to help. I argued, but he said, please just do it for me. Maybe it'll help. And just putting those seeds in my mind of like, okay, maybe, okay, fine, I'll go. But eventually I think God used all these things, my prayers being answered. It took a couple years and even years after that to unpack what everything happened and how I was thinking and my thought patterns. But that being said, even if my story is just something that somebody could hear and know, like, wow, there's a person who, I'll be honest, I sometimes get sad, or like, it's in the winter here in the Pacific Northwest and it rains for so long. And in the middle of winter, you get the blues, but it's not what it was. And I think, and I know how to cope, and I have those skills now to handle feeling the blues. And so, if people just hear even that I made it out of depression, that my mental illness got to the point where I can manage it now, and that I'm living with joy, and I have this faith that is bringing me hope, and maybe that's what somebody needs to hear today. Yeah.
So we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I would like to go into a little bit more detail on it. So depression, anxiety, hopelessness, discouragement, those are all things that plague our society today, right? As people and as Christians, how do you think we are prepared to overcome and get through these difficult times and these feelings that we get?
Yes. So anxiety and feelings are not evil or wrong. They are our senses. Emotions are thought. So it's not like these are my thoughts and these are my emotions. Emotions are a form of thought in the human brain. And so it's important to recognize that you can have a sensation or a feeling, kind of like something's hot to the touch or cold to the touch. And that's a feeling, and that's part of your thinking through, and your emotions are like that. But what we meditate on is very important. And something that I would say is that when you're enduring suffering, it's important to think appropriately about those things and to continue to hope. And for me, I had to undo a lot of thought patterns that would take me down that route of sadness and self-destruction, really. I was fantasizing hurting myself or taking my life. I fortunately didn't, but I was thinking those dark thoughts. And I realized in the midst of things that, like, as I studied the Bible and I studied what God was saying, he was saying, I want you here, and I created you, and that I created you for a purpose, and that it's to do good and do these good things I prepared for you to do. And I realized how meaningful that was for me, that instead of thinking how I want to hurt myself and end the pain I'm going through, how about I am thankful for what I do have right in front of me, and how about I start exchanging thoughts. So anytime I started doing this pattern in my life, that anytime I started thinking the sad thought, I said, I won't continue thinking that. I maybe can't help that I feel that way, but I will think of something I'm thankful for. So I would just think of anything, even if it was just God loves me, that I would exchange the thought. And over a long time, and still going through therapy, still going through counseling, and taking this medication that maybe would make the pain of it all a little bit less harsh, I found that I could be thankful and be joyful even, and choose to be joyful. But it's not something you're going to naturally want to do. When you're going through depression, you really don't want to fight it. And so I would maybe use the word endure it. Endure and practice these things that we've seen help someone who's going through that. We have evidence that doing these healthy patterns in your life can help someone who's going through depression or other mental illnesses. So trust that and have faith and start walking in those ways. It does help, and there is a way out. You're not alone. And ultimately, I believe that God is with us, and that he sends his love to us, and that he's shown us that. And if that is kind of a starting point for you, is just to know that you are loved unconditionally, and to start there. But if all you need is is just a friend to even reach out, or if you know that you could be helped by starting this conversation. Yeah. Start it with us, start it with a friend. Don't be afraid, and don't go off into the dark and silence. There is light. There is a way other than the darkness, and the world is full of darkness, but there is light also, and we are here and we are fighting to bring more light.
Have these conversations. They can be uncomfortable. I think we all agree on that. They're not the easiest to move into, but they're important to have. And whether that's with just a parent, a cousin, a friend, me, anyone, just find those conversations and talk about it. If you're going through these hard times, if you're depressed, talk about it before you make any sort of decisions that is going to affect many, many lives around you. People love you.